Or I guess I'll do the end. Oh, that's great. All right, welcome everyone to Individual Creative Business Panel 2, Day 1. Thanks for joining us. My name is Anne-Marie McCaskill-Davis, and I am the Cultural Funding Specialist Senior with the City of Austin Economic Development Department's Cultural Arts Division. I'm just going to go over a few things before we get started. We do have a facilitator here today to help with this conversation besides myself. So I'll be serving as sort of the resident expert on the Elevate Grant Program guidelines. And then my colleague here, Alberto Mejia, will also be contributing some helpful thoughts. Do you want to provide a little introduction and information about your role today?
Sure. Thank you, everybody who's here with us today. My name is Alberto Mejia. I'm with Tequio Community Works, which is a team of me. So I'm here really in the capacity of just really supporting these folks that are given their time to, I guess, align with the guidelines and sort of mitigate or facilitate any moments where we need a little extra support in decision making or coming to clarity. So that we're doing this fairly and equitably and in resourcing the folks that are up for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto. So today's panel is Individual Creative Businesses Panel 2, which has mostly comprised of creative businesses. Panelists have all reviewed the applications prior to today, so that means they've already given preliminary scores and written comments. They may change their scores and comments during this session today and will be finalized at the end of the day. Each application will have 10 minutes max per application. I'll be timing those. And I'll give a 3-minute warning, a 2-minute, 1-minute, and then a 30-second warning to give folks a heads up when we're on the countdown for the remainder of 10 minutes. We'll stop the recording and the timer if there are any tech issues that arise. Panelists have been instructed to not necessarily repeat the same comments that have already been stated, although they are welcome to reiterate if something seems particularly important to them about the application. The panelists are not scoring on a consensus, so it's completely possible that one panelist will have a specific interpretation or take on one application, while another panelist will have a completely different thought process on the application and have a different feeling about it. And that's totally fine. They will not be announcing a numeric score. They're just going to be providing general comments, including suggestions for future application improvement. Their comments should align with the funding criteria as presented in the Elevate Grant guidelines. They should not be basing scores on information that's not listed in the rubric, as in they're not scoring on financial need, for example. We've instructed them to look beyond grantsmanship. They are allowed to use firsthand experience. So if they've had firsthand experience with your organization, they can incorporate that into their scoring. That's totally fine. They can also have reviewed your website as well, if that was included in part of your application. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, we'll ask them to turn their camera off while the rest of the panel is deliberating. Excuse me. And then we'll invite them back once they're done finalizing scores. Before we begin this session, our very first application that's coming up, we have an interpreter who has joined us. Daily Montenegro is here as part of the panel for this first application. We will also be giving this application a 20-minute time limit instead of the 10-minute time limit to accommodate the consecutive interpretation. If folks are all set and ready to go, the first application up for review is Ecate Cultural. Maria will be the primary, and Cindy will be the secondary. And I'll go ahead and let Daly start her interpretation.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Daly Montenegro. Voy a ser su intérprete el día de hoy. nuestra primer negocio es Tecate Cultural.
Hi. So I thought this was a strong application.
María está diciendo que esa aplicación fue una aplicación muy fuerte.
I liked that there were 4 separate groups and that it was dedicated to the promotion of Mexican arts and strengthening the Latino community.
Lo que me gustó es que tenía 4 grupos diferentes y es arte mexicano y promueve la cultura mexicana, hispana.
And that the history of their works spanned a number of different disciplines: opera, film, visual art, theater, but all with the focus on that Spanish and Mexican heritage.
Lo que me gustó de la historia de este negocio es que enfocan diferentes áreas como teatro y arte.
And that they had a number of collaborators, Ballet East, I believe Ballet Hispanico, Roy Lozano's Ballet Hispanico, and seemed very ingrained in the community.
Lo que me gustó es que tiene diferentes colaboradores de ballet y arte.
And I also appreciated that their proposed activities spanned over a longer time period, and again, were from a variety of disciplines for different audiences.
Y lo que me gustó es que las actividades que tienen en este momento están separadas en un largo tiempo y que colaboran con diferentes áreas, no solamente eso, pero se enfocan en diferentes audiencias.
And I think that their mission clearly focuses on creating art that is for communities that have been marginalized historically and are at risk of cultural erasure, and that they are also from those communities, so they have the voice to be able to serve them.
Me gusta mucho que la misión de ese negocio es crear arte en áreas donde hay historia detrás del arte.
And beyond that the activities seemed interesting and inviting for tourists, that people from both those communities, but other communities as well, would be interested in attending the events.
Lo que me gusta también es que ese negocio es también basado en el turismo para invitar a diferentes personas, no solamente a las personas hispanas, sino para otras diferentes culturas que conozcan la cultura mexicana.
And I liked that they had bilingual experiences as well.
Y lo que me gusta es que tienen experiencia en bilingüe.
And that's pretty much it on my comments. And I will be giving them a high score.
La señorita María le está dando una calificación alta a esa aplicación y es todos sus comentarios por el momento.
So I'm in the secondary. I agree with Maria with these the comments that she made. And more specifically, I like that the organization points to the gap in cultural spaces it has noticed in the past couple of months.
La señorita Cindy está diciendo que ella está en acuerdo con la señorita María. Lo que le gusta es que la organización apunta en la cultura y cómo está espaciada en este momento.
I think the organization, I apologize, I'm struggling as I'm hearing Spanish. I want to translate in Spanish my notes.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's okay. It's just that's why I'm hesitating.
Okay.
But so let me start again. So the organization has a clear mission to address the needs of Mexican American, Latina, and Indigenous communities residing in Austin, and that. But I do think that the proposal could benefit from a more developed explanation on how they can address intersectionality in the community.
Okay, so la misión claramente está dirigida a la comunidad, las comunidades indígenas, pero por el visto, y otras comunidades similares a eso, pero ella, la señorita Cindy, dice que la información puede beneficiarse también. Can you please repeat the last part? I'm sorry.
Yes, from explaining on providing more examples on how it can encourage intersectionality in the community.
Pero ella, la señorita Cindy piensa que se puede beneficiar el negocio si pueden explicar un poco más con ejemplos de cómo se puede beneficiar el interseccional.
And the reason this is something that I'm highlighting is because there is a growing need or want to highlight Afro, Black, Mexican, and Latina individuals. So that is something that I would have liked to see in more detail.
You said Afro, Black, Mexican, correct? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. La razón por qué ella está dando sugerencia es porque lo que ella está viendo es que hay mucha necesidad para poder crecer y si se basan en la cultura que es afroamericana, mexicana.
Overall, I will be scoring this proposal with a medium high score. And overall, I think that the proposal does benefit the community they claim to through the narrative that they provided.
En total, la señorita Cindy les da una calificación de mediano alto porque como pueden ver, la aplicación muestra que se puede beneficiar y están beneficiando a la comunidad.
Okay. Pues gracias, Dali. The first and second readers, or the primary and secondary readers, have offered their perspective and comments. Does anyone else on the panel want to add to what's been said? Okay, going once. Going twice, we can move on to the next applicant.
Thank you so much for your help today, Dolly. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
All right, bye-bye. Okay, up next is Dorian Lassard and Crinakas de Capoeira, Angola. I'm not sure I got that first word there correct. Zuli will be the primary and La'Arni will be the secondary. Let me reset the timer. And Zuli, whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer when you begin speaking.
Okay. I really enjoyed reading this proposal. My comments specifically, I thought that the mission of this organization is actually really special because it connects people, specifically Black diasporic people, African American people, to their bodies through an art form. And something that just happens in existing systems of white supremacy and racism is that we get out of our bodies daily. And I thought that utilizing an art form that is historically rooted, like in your ancestry, to reconnect you to who you are as a person, but who you are as a community, kind of tying that all together, I thought that was really special. The history of the community support that this organization has provided is really fantastic. And someone that is very acquainted with Austin because I used to go there all the time. And I really like that the African American community is centered in this proposal, in this work, and it's really evident and in a very non-performative way, but there's an actual investment. So, and again, utilizing art to lift community and build relationships. And I thought that the work it's commendable work to support differently abled people in this physical art form. I really loved what they provided for accessibility and explained there. And of course, also making sure that present translator could accommodate multiple languages. I mean, I was just very happy with that. And yeah, I'm very happy with it. I thought it was really great. And I wish you all the best after this proposal. And it's definitely going to get a high score from me.
I'm saying it right, Criancas de Capoeira. I appreciated the long history that Dorian has offered the Austin community. I was reminded of what he founded a few decades ago, almost, right? Like 2010, the Orun Center for Cultural Change. So he started building from the very beginning and even having a center. So for folks to be able to come in and just have profound and centering experience to connect it to their spirituality outside of the limitations of what Austin was and is. It's getting harder to be here in terms of your whole self. So for them to have done a lot of the work that's been kind of invisible because back then we didn't have the Instagram and all the social media highlighting a lot of the work, and so to see them still here there's that appreciation of like, oh good, I'm glad. And seeing him around the community and seeing him in a personal space, like the way that he has taken care of a lot of people, it is the project is a reflection of just a continuation of what they have done. So him and his team, the community that stands behind him, and those are for me the people that he serves and he is responsible to, and then the communities that these leaders are taking care of. So the way I'm seeing where this this place is here in terms of like our cultural history here right now, you know, I scored them fairly high because there's just such a need for all of this, especially now, and for the youth now who are waking up to a lesser Black, Indigenous, person of color Austin. It reminds them of the history that's been here, that we were never really gone, even if in spite of what things look like. So for me, that serves the purpose and it gives value to the purpose of the grant. So thank you.
Thank you, Suli and Laarni. So the first and the primary and secondary reader have offered their comments. Does anyone else want to offer any additional perspective or insight here for the applicant? Going once, going twice. We can move on to the next application. Cindy is here. Cindy is
Yes.
coming in over the timeline, but that's okay.
So I just can I just unmute myself each time? I don't have to raise my hand. Okay. I just wanted to point out that I thought it was great that they had a behavior therapist on site, because there's different forms or different disabilities or abilities. So I like that they provide that.
I'm just going to echo kind of Cindy and Zuli in that I was really impressed as well by how incorporated the accommodations were, that they were sort of just part of the programming versus, oh, we will bring somebody in. It was really integrated. And I thought that was really fantastic.
Right on. I think I really appreciate the perspective of folks that have been around and see these folks in practice. I think it would be a real gift, especially for folks watching this, if we also talk about how the project is manifesting in the here and now, and offering that feedback related to. I love grounding it in the context of the history as well, but just wanted to invite us to also lean into what the project is doing here and now, like we have been doing, and leaning into that even more in our commentary. Thank you. We can move to the next project.
Excellent. So the next application up for review is Latin Music Coalition Austin. Maria is the primary and Laarni is the secondary. I feel like I'm the primary a lot on this afternoon and or secondary. But it might just be my personal perspective. Anyway, so this is the Latin Music Coalition of Austin, or just Latin Music Coalition Austin. And they're a group that is together to promote Latino arts and create equal opportunities for those populations. Their application spoke well to sort of their mission. Obviously is really rooted in promoting Latino artists and helping to kind of try to even the playing field and bring them so that they're more featured in really commercial music spaces. I mean, obviously it's a commercial thing. Commercial music spaces. I liked that they had a South by Southwest showcase, which is of course such a great opportunity that musicians have to get in front of lots of faces and audiences. And that they had that in their history. Their proposed project is 4 shows or showcases, kind of spanning a year, September, July, October, and I think there was the one other one I wasn't sure the date of yet, that were featuring kind of different types of Latin music. And that I like that they're kind of advising, so they kind of provide DEI advising to numerous sort of larger promoters, concert promoters and bookers in Austin. And I appreciated that voice. I think some of their application, for such as like collaborators, I can tell that they're involved, but I would have liked to know more about their partnerships with some of these organizations. A couple of the questions was sort of just a listing of names of organizations, and I wish I had understood a little bit more about what that level of collaboration is with the group and them.
but I do think that the project itself of the concerts and that they are connected to all of these sort of promoters makes them a strong application to promote Latino voices and music in Austin. And I will pass it to our secondary.
Thank you, Maria. I was back and forth with the application because I was trying to know more about them. And I learned that they stem from, or their roots is EQ Austin. And just from reading that, I had to read more on who and what is EQ Austin. So my understanding is their core purpose is to make sure that there is, diversity and focus on folks who have been marginalized. And this the same purpose of our grant. I was hoping the same thing that Maria mentioned, like the activities, the work, just the work sample that backed it up, were a sample of the artists from the most recent show, which was this year. I was hoping to see more of the other activities and the other efforts, because a lot of the names are there, and that would have required us to really look into who's there, especially if we're not familiar with the groups that have been, working towards, putting some kind of a reflection of the community. I keep going back into the purpose of art and culture, cultural arts is so that we can be reminded of our history and our stories. And there are many histories and stories that are embodied by folks, by people, by groups, by music. And so it leads me back to that whole purpose is this is what they are. This is their main project, is to make sure that the Cultural Heritage Day or a month is highlighted. I didn't learn about that until my children started going to school, even if I'm in the communities here that we share space with. There is a need for history, and history is learned through the dances, the music, just the inspiration from the music. So it led me back to that, even if I'm like, okay, I couldn't find a lot of their work, the description of the work, because there's the collaboration, there's the mentorship, but I wanted to see what kind of mentorship was going on, and who in those particular groups were receiving those kind of mentorships. But I understand that because I've seen it in action. But for the purposes of the grant and for sharing with folks, it would be great to have that that as a backup for what they have written. But I'm familiar with because I'm from Austin, I'm familiar with the work that's been shown and the collaborations with the organizations that's here, and of course the work that has been done. But let's see whatever sending, because there's the answering question of meeting which goals. So I see that there's a lot. They're connected with a lot of folks, which is great to see, because we do, everybody does have to work together to make sure that it stays alive. So I understand that, and I appreciate that whole community here too. And it looks like a lot of work to me. So I even just bringing people together that way, this is a lot of heart and work from the organizer. But I see, I'm looking for like, where's the other stuff, right? So, but I understand it. So that's my offering.
Thank you, Laarni and Maria. So the primary and secondary reviewers have offered their commentary. Does anyone else want to offer some insight or feedback as they relate to the criteria here? Yes, I see Jess.
Yes, I just wanted to say I enjoyed this application. Texas is now 40% Hispanic, so they have the largest population, and I think representation and awareness is a very important part of that. And so having opportunities for their music to be represented is key. So I really enjoyed this application, and I scored it highly.
Thank you, Jess. Sorry, Cindy.
No, it's okay. So I'm taking a different opposing view here. The proposal seemed to lack information for me, and I think Larani, you touched on this in terms of the lack of. There's a lot of naming of people, but there's no explicit mention of the power and privileges that they have or don't have. Like, I would have liked to see more of that actual explanation and or examples, because the Latino community isn't a community, it's a communities. There's several different demographics within that coalition. And so I would have liked to see more development on how they will reach out to LGBTQ folks, again, African American, Black, Latinos.
Thank you, Cindy. I got the 3-minute warning a minute ago, so you're on, Suli, for this final comment.
Yeah, a little bit going off of what Cindy was saying, you know, as somebody that doesn't have the context of being in Austin in the current scene right now, the proposal was difficult for me to understand because a lot of some of the sections were just lists of names, and I don't have that context, and I can kind of guesstimate that these are good orgs or good partners or like, you know, but unless I'm in the scene, I don't have a narrative to better understand that context. So feedback for future proposals is that you have to be able to explain it to somebody that doesn't live in Austin to make the case.
Thank you, Suli. I really appreciate everyone's candidness and feedback on how these applications can present stronger in terms of their operations or their cultural and social impact. So we'll move on to the next application. Thank you all so much.
Still have a minute left.
Is there any other burning commentary here that can be done in 45 seconds?
Can I drink water on camera?
I think that's
I've been
allowed.
drinking like 5 drinks. I just water. It's just different cups of water. Sorry. I was just gonna add, I noted it about the list of applications, but like names, but I did sort of also think it through as when we're talking about grantsmanship, and if people don't understand necessarily what that means, if they're like, oh, who are my collaborators? Here's a list of the collaborators. And so I did feel like, while I wanted a lot more context there, I did give them the benefit of the doubt when I saw what their programming was and a lot of the other components, like that they're really going to be they have actual events they're producing that will bring up these historically marginalized voices. And so that's where I kind of went on that side of it for the other side of that listing.
I also do appreciate that the proposal, the prompts always say describe. So that also.
I have a good question.
Do we have
All
time
right,
for the question as it
that's
relates
time.
to?
The
We
alarm,
gotta move on.
timer just went off. Maybe it'll apply to another application. Save it for
right.
maybe another one. All right, up next is Passage Productions, LLC. Larnie, you are up as primary, and Maria, you will be secondary. And Larnie, you may begin whenever you're ready. You're muted. Sorry, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Which one are we?
Oh, Passage Productions.
Oh, okay. Okay. Ooh. Okay, so this. Trying to find my notes. But I remember this is about, the project was about a film, supporting the film that follows the reentry for George Renaud. And let me keep looking for my, I'm sorry, let me see.
We can pause until you pull up your notes. That's fine. Take your time.
Thank you.
Oh.
Not sure what I'm. Let me pull from memory.
That's okay. There's no rush. Keep looking if you
Okay,
want to.
thank you.
That's fine.
Are you
Yeah,
in the
keep
big
looking.
spreadsheet, Arnie? And if you're in the big spreadsheet, sometimes I just Control F the name because I know it's hard to find in these big spreadsheets.
I
Mhm.
created my own because
Oh,
my whole limited, my brain work, you know.
okay, no
ADD, all
problem.
this other
Pardon.
stuff. So, okay. I don't know where I can. Okay, so her, let me at least pull the application up.
Take your time. I'm not recording. It's
Thank
not,
you.
I don't have the timer on, so there's no.
There we go. I'm gonna draw from the application. I don't know what happened to my notes. So this is it follows the reentry for George Renaud's life after imprisonment and parole, and it highlights the just the experiences and then the invisible trauma that there's childhood trauma within, you know, how things happen, how things are brought to why people end up where they end up. So it highlights a little bit of that, but it mostly pretty much puts his story up front. So it's a long project because they have to follow him, and it started over a decade ago, and it says that okay, the story for George is he is an advocate here. He's a community leader here in Austin, and he shares his story through advocacy, and he pretty much created his own path. And what I was trying to see is the connection and what's the purpose for her in terms of the work that she's done, her history in terms of production. This is a film, a documentary film. She's worked on other projects that highlights prison, pretty much the experience of being in prison. And there are people and advisors that backs her up, but what I wanted to see was who amongst her advisors were one who's been incarcerated, who's had that experience. And what I saw was these are also advocates, like the list of advocates, like lawyers, they have positions of power, they even whatever that got them there. So the ones supporting her now are folks who are in organizations. And so for me, when I was reading the application, I was looking for the voices of the folks who've had that experience. And there's one voice, which is the whole focus of the film. And there was a part where she said that, where the applicant said that I have learned to be accountable to, you know, which communities are that we brought forward. And this is most recent. So there's the realization that came later on. And it's probably the progression of awareness and the progression of like, oh, there's this stuff that we haven't really seen in a different light. So there is awareness of that. There's an acknowledgement. there's an outreach and plan. The plan of the budget will support the outreach to folks who have the same stories and holding those kinds of conversation. But I still want to look for the leadership that backs that conversation up, like who holds the space, and where is the conversations being held, because the folks that they're bringing forward in the continuation of the project are still folks who has positions, who are in, to me, a protected positions of advocacy. Because if folks who have had a lived experience start to do the same thing, the voices are, it's received differently. So that's what I was looking for, is which constituents are we highlighting and giving voice to. So thank you.
So kind of I agree with the comments from Arnie, and I also felt like the application, I think some of the documentary film projects can be hard because it's somebody maybe outside of the person who's being focused, and they're putting their vision and how they interpret it on the person. I also just basically the scope of the Elevate grant project and what we were given as the communities that we're looking to serve, or not to serve, but to fund. It felt like the focus of this was a step off of that, so that it was really focused on the idea of incarcerated individuals returning to being released from prison and being returned to society at large, and that it showed that any sort of screenings would serve those populations. I just could not find a through line in this application of where it was really either created for or would serve really the historically marginalized communities or communities at risk of cultural erasure, in the bigger picture that we're kind of tasked with looking for in these applications. And it also was very solely focused. It did not feel actually super community based. It felt like a very small subset of individuals to me. So this was not, I did not score this application particularly high, because I felt like the project itself seems really interesting. She's really focused on her work. She seems like an excellent filmmaker. It just felt outside of the scope of what we're kind of tasked with funding with this opportunity.
Thank you, Maria. How much time do we have for our other commenters here, Anne-Marie? And I see your hand, Zuli.
About 3.5 minutes, so plenty
Please
of
go.
time.
All right, go ahead, Zuli. Thank you.
Just, I actually thought that this application was, in terms of what they're addressing, is really interesting, and it's actually pretty strong. I have a social work background, and a lot of the work that I did was working with people involved with the justice system and doing therapeutic things within jails, and kind of working on how reentry programs for folks in prison that were imprisoned. And I will just say that systemically, just to give some context, systemically, this is a group that is out of sight, out of mind, and the system isn't built for them to succeed in reentry. And I do think that the panel, in terms of cultural leadership, the folks in the part of the cultural leadership that was listed in this was really strong, and included some folks that aren't just academics, but have experienced it themselves and are activists in that space. And if we're talking about marginalized groups and protected classes, even if it's not something that in this country is specifically seen that way, I do think that people that have been part of the justice system are a class of people that are marginalized in an intersection of ways that we usually are not aware of if we don't directly work with them, or if we're not part of that experience. I will say that.
Is there any other comments related to this application before we move on? I will say that having sat in this position of where, CAD sits, that film is hard in terms of translating it to community place-based things, even when the sort of the content is aligned. I also makes me kind of wonder how we might look to past successful film projects that have got, that have been made, that sort of made that case, if you will. And I encourage, all applicants to the degree they can, look at what past successful applications have been in their medium, and that information is available to people. Not always quickly, but it is available. So we can move on. Thank you all so much for your comments.
All right. Up next is Work Out with Erica Nix. Maria is the primary and Cindy is the secondary. And Maria, you may begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, so this is Workout with Erica Nix's proposal for Pleasure Church, which would be sort of a site-based happening, I think, with dance and a choir, with using the tactics of evangelical church and pyramid schemes. I thought that she showed a very strong history of interesting intersectional performance-based work. That's not something that everybody else is sort of doing. I mean, honestly, none of these applications were things that everybody else is doing, so I don't want to discount any of those. I found this interesting. I thought that the work was collaborative. I liked that it incorporated the idea that there would be maybe 4 separate performances of Pleasure Church, and that at each one there would be real-time sort of audience feedback gathered, and those would be incorporated as the project continued on, and that different voices from a variety of identities would be centered and featured in each of the performances. I think there was a very much, I have really bad handwriting, and I like told myself to write my notes in handwriting that I could read, but I didn't do it. As I said that. Yeah, and I think that a strong involvement with community was demonstrated in the application. I thought the focus was primarily on identities that had other forms of marginalization. I think there was a good amount of BIPOC mentions, but really that the targeting and the focus was more on the LGBTQIA, queer, trans communities. And so a lot of my scoring kind of aligned with that category, the highest level for those. But I thought it sounded like a great project and very interesting, and I appreciated the application because I thought it was conversational and really told the story of what the plan was.
Yeah, I'll just keep going into that. I thought the way the proposal was written flowed very well. It was it provided information, but it was also engaging. But aside from that, instead of grading on craftsmanship, is that I do think that they clearly explored how they are working to elevate LGBTQ individuals through different art forms. And I really like that they emphasized how their space is meant to not just be, to touch on that Austin weird vibe that there is, but also about queer love and queer joy. I appreciated that was kept in mind. And I think another thing that stood out to me from this application was that they explicitly named not just their creative work in these dedicated spaces, but also outside of that, in terms of political action and how that they tied that to long-term individual and systemic change that they're hoping to achieve. But I will say that some of the language in the proposal in terms of referencing other marginalized communities stood out to me as not being the best. And so I would encourage the applicant to explore that more. And generally find more authentic ways of centering other folks, even though they are the business leader of this Pleasure Church organization. I think that there are opportunities to center other double marginalized individuals. But overall, I think that the proposal clearly talked about how they will use their creative work to engage their target community.
Both so much. So the first and second reviewer have offered their comments. Do any of the other panelists want to offer any commentary on this application? I'm looking for hands. I'm looking for eyes. Seeing none, we can move on to the next application. Thank you.
Well, there's not a next application right away. Right now, it's time for a break.
All right.
So go get some tea, have some coffee if you want to stay up all night because it's afternoon. It's too late to have coffee. At least for me. I'll be up all night. Otherwise, take a little breather, do some stretches, maybe. Walk around a little bit, and then we'll be back at 3:08. Okay. All right, welcome back to Individual and Creative Business Panel 2, Day 1. The next application for review is managed by Dawn. Juan Ramon will be the primary and Cindy will be the secondary. Juan Ramon, whenever you're ready to go, you can just start speaking and I'll start the timer.
Okay, so as to refresh our memories, this is a Black music and wellness festival. I really like the self-care and diverse music genres that were proposed in this project. A lot of items seem to check off as far as let's see, just background and the people that it's going to serve. Looking at my notes for history of service, I think I noticed Sixth Grade was in there, and there's a couple of past projects that they've done. I wish that there was a little bit more details in there of how they're connected with the community and maybe some more about, some more about that. I feel like community was missing from some of those past examples. Cultural leadership, it explained, I was hoping for a little bit more explanation on personal background. I don't feel that I got a good sense of the people or this group. It seemed very generic about, saying representing the community, provide leadership. And so hopefully just get a little bit more detailed into that would be great. Community voice, I've already kind of mentioned that I wish there's a little bit more community in here. So I appreciate that you intend to work for the community. So that's to work with the community. So that's good. Let's see, cultural activities and relevance. I think sometimes the scope for me was a little bit unclear and I wasn't sure how large of a scale it would be. It would be nice if I know I've seen some examples that were submitted that were for past events, but maybe a little bit more description on those past events or photos or locations, just so we can kind of get a full picture of this is what they've done and this is what they want to do on a different scale. One thing that I was a little confused of is how are tourists accessing this, depending on that location, depending on that space. It's just kind of was blanket about festival and workshops. I do think there was I guess maybe an intention to reference intersectionality and talk about perhaps there might be an LGBTQ panel, but that said may. And so may versus there will, just using the language clearly and stating what you're going to provide or not provide. Community relationships, I felt, again, we've already discussed that. We could have a little bit more information on that. Good intention, okay, accessibility. I think maybe if we could go into a little bit more strategy and marketing goals, that felt a little bit lacking. The details on the budget were pretty helpful. I think I just couldn't understand the scope and I couldn't visualize that scope, but that kind of summarizes my comments.
I'll, because it's from the top of my head, based on Juan's statements, I will also, I also agree in terms of the lack of explicit naming of how the community is involved, because, let's see, although staff and volunteers are mentioned, there is no clear indication on whether this support is representative of the community it aims to represent. I think they mentioned having volunteers from a business that resides here in Austin, but I wasn't sure based on what they responded, whether they had other volunteers from the community that they directly aim to serve. And going off of that, based on the responses that they provided for community relationships and whether there was a balance on in-kind and financial participation with the community, it didn't seem very balanced to me. So I do think that that's a point of growth for this organization for future proposals. In terms of the things that I liked very much were that the applicant explicitly says that they will have their, not only will they have an ASL interpreter, but they will also have their festival staff trained on disability awareness and accessibility guidelines. I think as an organization or business, they would benefit greatly from that and take that forward to other events that they may have in the community. But on that note, I do think that they could explore having accessibility in other spoken languages to expand their services or the festival to other people in the community. And overall, I do think that the proposal has a clear message on how it wants this Black Music and Wellness Festival to touch on Black art and music and wellness, because it's not something that is equitably distributed and accessible to this marginalized group. But yeah, so I will say that I think that was apparent in their writing, but I think that there is room for growth.
Thank you both. So the first, the primary and secondary review have shared their comments. Would anyone else like to offer their perspective here?
I have a question about, you know, when folks haven't really done it for a long time, their history for their project history, right? There's a lot of folks here who have done low-key community work It's not on Facebook, Instagram, no website. My question is, how do we tend to those kinds of applications when it's foundational, when it's the first time that they're asking for support, and if their reach is not so great? So for this particular grant, what are we leaning more towards? Like the ones who have done the work, who's built the community, who has already created proof, right? Like the
Right.
proof. We since we don't have a lot of time researching and all that stuff, but that's my question.
Mm.
Who and what are we mostly leaning towards creating that equity? Because this is grounding us to what equity means. So that's what I
Right.
want to ask.
Yeah, that's
Larnie,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
well, I appreciate you bringing that back to the center, Larnie, and I think that it's kind of important to I don't know, remind ourselves that the purpose of the Elevate grant, that these are people that are not currently receiving funding according to the eligibility criteria. Also, I think this is, if I'm not mistaken, one of the first times that the panelists like yourself have had to be able to shift context from an organization to an individual creative business practitioner, right? So, I mean, I kind of want to answer your question with the question. So, Arnie, we deal with these things on a case by case basis. So, is there knowledge you have of this particular applicant in terms of the work they've done in community that could ameliorate this? Because it is important, but we deal with these things on a case by case basis according to what each applicant states in their application. So is there anything you have to offer in regard to this particular applicant?
Not the first person, but for the name to be heard within community members that, oh yeah, Dawn, right? Oh yeah, Dawn. That is what I was feeling when I was reading this. But again, if you look at the application, if we're looking for support work so that we can learn more, that's what I like. Because even in those kinds of spaces, the conversations about like, oh yeah, Dawn did this, right? I didn't ask further, I just listened, but it didn't happen too often that I was not in the same space. But there's a deep need for
take your time. Do you need a moment, Larnie? Would you like to, and then come back around to you, or do you need some more time?
I'm good, thanks. So
okay.
A lot of the work that we want to highlight, right, is what's missing. And most of the time we know the stories of why it's missing, because we don't feel empowered enough to one advocate for ourselves and another advocate for each other. So we have these spaces to where we hear our communities and they speak of what needs to be tended to. And what's missing is the bridging of a language. And right now, I can see clearly that it's been written well. I see that. But in terms of like in depth, right? There are reasons why we can't provide proof of the work. It's because we've done it silently and amongst each other. And the reach that part of the grant is asking for is, what's your reach, right? How many people can you help? It takes one. It takes one. I've seen that in many spaces. These are the folks who are pulling from their pockets. And continue to do so until they're burnt out. So the way I see what I feel that our role here is to create that space to where, how do we highlight, how do we listen, how do we see beyond what we know of, how do we break those? Because I think I met Anne-Marie virtually a few years ago because I was one of them. Like, I don't even know how to approach City of Austin. I don't even know how to write these things. but I am with everyone who has been doing the work, and we don't have evidence of our work. We don't have all that.
Mhm.
So I say that to say that I see the purpose, and I've heard her name. I don't have any kind of reference in terms like, yeah, this is what she did exactly, but it's
Mhm.
the feeling that she left the person. And I know this
Mhm.
person personally. And so I don't know the context of it, but I see and read energy. And that's all I really have is
Mm.
what the promise is and the community that holds her. So I don't
Totally.
know her enough to speak for her, but I see these stories and hear these stories a lot, a lot. And so that's where I'm coming from.
I
Yeah.
I want to uplift and thank you for what you said, because there is a lot of the folks that are behind the scenes making space for others, and they don't always have the time, support, resources necessary to sort of codify, capture their narrative, their work, right? So I think that is true for many creative businesses, especially those that are not doing the nonprofit side of things. So I honor what you said, Arnie. Thank you. Is there anything else that wants to be added?
Well, I was just wanting to add
Hmm.
that in terms of the Elevate grant, sort of the guidelines, technical information, these grants are open to applicants who have they have to have at least 1 year of production history. So there definitely will be applications, and you've probably have reviewed some that are very new to the process. So they may not have a lot of back history, which is totally fine. In terms of the City of Austin granting funds to them. Some future ways of documenting that or just addressing that is just saying we're new, and that's okay. We'll work with what you have, and we're excited for what you're envisioning for the future. So just that's something to keep in mind, is that there's no 5-year history required or more than that to be funded by the city. And even just talking about future potential documentation to include in an application for a new applicant, are just, a list of events that have been done, even if they've never been, if there's no photographic evidence necessarily, or if there's no Facebook post about it. Also, letters of support from community is also a really excellent way of communicating impact, especially for folks who are new. Anyone, or well, any applicant really having really impactful statements from people who've participated in the work that can really tell a lot to a panelist. So some areas of thought for applicants. We've hit time for this one. Let's go ahead and move on to the next application. We are looking at Radiant Child Media. And Zuli, you are the primary. And Larnie, you will be the secondary. And Zuli, whenever you're ready, I'm going to reset. The timer's already reset.
I just need a second. When
Oh
I
yeah,
have
take your time.
my
No
share.
rush.
Oh.
Yeah. So thank you, Larnie, for asking that question. That was a really great one.
Can y'all hear me? Yeah, okay, good. And my headphones were being weird, I'm sorry. Okay, so Radiant Child Media's proposal had to do with actually a short form documentary project that focuses on preserving ballroom culture in the Gulf Coast. We're seeing a rise in popular culture of integrating ballroom culture into popular art, like popular music. And I think a project like this is really important to maintain roots, just to highlight where this came from as it's like slowly disseminated in kind of watered down ways, if that makes sense. Um, I thought that I'm going to go to my comments instead of just saying that I like it. So I said for the mission and key constituents, I said preserving ballroom culture narratives outside of the hub of New York City is so important, as ballroom culture is more mainstream and is utilized by pop artists to curate their branding and music today. So the fact that we highlighting this history in Texas, I think is super important, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I also like that there's a cross section of like community engagement through gatherings, workshops, low cost public programs, so accessibility in that way. And I thought that the team that was shown in the proposal looked really strong. We have folks, this is Radiant Child Media is a Black owned and operated company in Austin, Texas. So we're uplifting, BIPOC creators, BIPOC businesses. And yeah, I think that they're strong in showing their connection to community in different ways. And intersectionality is definitely there, just inherently, but also the intentionality of the project in terms of intersectionality. I thought that was really strong. I always look at accessibility, right? I think that's accessibility, I wish was a little more intentional, as they can accommodate upon request, and it could just be part of it, And I did think that language access, right now, they just language access could be strengthened. But overall, I think this is a really great proposal.
I was actually excited reading the proposal, and I was like, yes, that's my personal joy. And I was trying to figure out like, oh, where are the locations? And really touched base with the whole idea of accessibility. And it's like, okay, so once we get the basics down, like it should be part of the basics, but in terms of our access, that's what makes it difficult, is it makes other things secondary. And so just to add this part, like the whole time that I was reading all the application, I've become more conscious about what accessibility really means. And I do have, that's something that we also need to for my family, but we don't know how to ask. So this gave me an insight of like, hey, this is the base, that's basic. And this is this is what you should have. So I learned a lot just from what it really, really means to have that term and everything. For the project and the person, doing the project, I have learned a lot about what the applicant has done for the community. And it's this constant, not just attempt, but beyond attempt to advocate for just showing. It's the showcase of culture, showcase of what wellness looks like, and showcase of who to bring and who to highlight. And it makes it inclusive to where it's welcoming. So there's a way of highlighting ethnicity or your own community, but also being welcoming to everyone. So that's what I've always felt every time this applicant curates anything. For the documentary, I'm really interested to see, more than interested to see, like how it forms. And another personal thing is my first exposure to Vogue is Madonna when I was in the Philippines. So when I learned more about what ballroom is, and even more recently what the roots are, it opens me up to like, there's so much erasure that has happened. And so even if this film is going to be based here in our region, and it will work with the folks here because there's like histories that's connected back, it will help clear, what goes out from Texas to national and global. It has this global capacity. So I lost my comments. But it's the trust with the curator that that's what I see and connected with in terms of how the work is going to go, because this particular with this particular applicant, I have been exposed to everything compared to the I'm not trying to compare, but like with my own way of not just relating, but exposure in terms of history and what has been done. So I again go back to the community that holds the applicant and who they're responsible for, and how are they being responsible to their community. And that's the foundation that I look for when I think about answering the questions that's related to the grant questionnaire. So I don't know if there's anything else I want to add, but thank you. Yeah.
Thank you both. I really appreciate the quality of the feedback. There's 3 minutes left for anyone else that would like to add any commentary to this application. Anyone, and if there's anyone who has a diverging view, it's welcomed.
I'll add commentary. I don't really have a diverging view though. But I will say this is, when we were talking about film projects being a challenge for this, I was also very excited by this project because it has the film, but the film is created sort of by and for, not just about, which I thought was a good distinction, and that it had the accompanying events so that it was really something that we can see will convene people and bring tourism. So I also rated it high and thought it was a very strong application.
Thank you, Maria. Is there anything else from anyone else? Okay, going once, going twice. Let's move on to the next application.
All right, the next application up for review is Full Gallop LLC, DBA Full Gallop. Cindy is the primary and Zuli is the secondary. And Cindy, I'll start the timer as soon as you begin speaking.
Yes, so for this application, the applicant talks about how they want this grant to fund a particular style or interpretation of Oktoberfest, where it will have a quote unquote Tex-Mex style. And so that's one aspect of what they would like to focus on. And then the other one is a separate event at different time where they have a holiday themed drag show. And this is with a prominent LGBTQ individual that they partnered with before. So in terms of the mission, I do think that they clearly state how these two different creative works, well, actually I should say that the holiday drag show, they do talk about how it is important to their mission to encourage and promote different cultures and provide those platforms and opportunities to people belonging to communities that may not have them. However, in terms of the other event that they are proposing, the October Tex-Mex Style Festival, I do think that there is a lack of clear intentionality there in terms of how they see themselves reaching specific groups of people. So I'll go more into detail about it. They want to focus on how polka music has evolved through a unique history into conjunto music, which is a very popular form of a Mexican genre. And I think that there could be more exploration on how on the educational aspect of that event, because just because you're providing an event or an activity doesn't mean that you're. I think that sometimes can translate. It translates more in my mind into providing diversity rather than inclusion. So to me, there's some growth there. I think they've reached the diversity aspect of DEI, but not the equity and inclusion aspect. And so I do think that there could be a greater emphasis on the education on how there was that specific merging of cultures. For community voice, I do think that they explore more on how they will include Mexican American artists in their work, and how they'll also include individuals that identify as Indigenous and Mexican American. And so I did like that aspect of their proposal. They also have in terms of community relationships, the letters of support that were provided seem to support their narrative that they have historically been able to provide folks with services such as mentorships, and just generally a good amount of publicity and reach to new audiences. And they've also partnered with other community orgs that are led by Black or other marginalized individuals. And so I think there is a commitment there to equity, but I do think that it could be further explored. And just generally, I think that because this is something that the proposal touches on a community that I belong to, I would like to see a more explicit intention on how they involve the Mexican American community from the very beginning, not just in terms of how they will help her curate the lineup for the festival. So more explanation on that would benefit this proposal a lot. And going back to the drag show that they will be hosting, there is no mention of how there's no mention of how they could target or reach other marginalized communities. But overall, I do think that the person that they are hosting it with has a clear vision already, and they are well known across the nation. But again, because this is a particular grant that wants to focus on addressing systemic racism, I would like to see specific explanations on how they can reach individuals who are double marginalized.
I agree, Cindy, with the things that you had to say. I will say, because I am a classical musician and I also lived in Germany for about 4 years, I have a good understanding of the historical transnational dialogues of how some European influences make their way into the music that is seen as ours today. For example, typical music in the Dominican Republic is heavy accordion heavy that came through with colonization. That said, I know that. So what you're similar to what you're saying, somebody could have the same discussion and strengthen the community impact with giving that context, right? And so I definitely agree with that. But like I said, since I know that, I'm like, oh yeah, cool. You know, I get that. I get the narrative there for that particular part of the proposal. I also wanted to, in this intersectionality and inclusion portion, for the Oktoberfest event, this proposal said that I also did attend a Oktoberfest many times. We could talk about that another time. It says it's going to blend different racial and socioeconomic backgrounds, but also right-wing and left-wing music lovers. It's a great way to have very important conversations of ideology through using an art form, and that's something that could have possibly strengthened that aspect of the application. And but that's just me thinking creatively. I do think that highlighting that connection of how we get some of the instruments and different musical forms in our cultures is really interesting and important. And I do, but that could be more explicitly expressed to the intended key constituents and creating space for that. Okay, I'm sorry. Bye.
I do not accept your apology. Was there any other commentary, y'all? I'm hearing, what I hear is this sort of feedback on the popular and localized education aspect of this. I'm wondering if anyone has anything else to say in terms of the operations or the cultural and social impact, according to those criteria too. But I do appreciate the focus on those things.
Sorry, I'll always talk if like nobody talks and somebody asks for people to talk. It felt general. It feels a very general. Like even though these are kind of these specific artists or ideas, it felt like it was for general audiences. That's all. So I didn't score it as high because of that, because it was for generalized audiences, and that's because of community voice not in it. Done.
There it is. Thank y'all. Thank y'all. I thought you faked us out and we like 10 minutes and you're like, no, 10 seconds. A little faked everyone out there. Well, thank y'all so much for the good feedback.
All right, last one for the day. It is Tiger Den ATX. Juan Ramon is up, and La Arnie, you're also up as secondary. Juan Ramon,
whenever. Okay, just pulling my notes. Okay, so Tiger Den, just to refresh our memories, this was a place that hosts marginalized communities and their creative offerings. The two that were mentioned were the Erotic Peep Show, as well as I believe there was also a Sunday drag proposal. And so that gives you context into this project. What I really enjoyed was that they're giving these groups opportunities to be creative and go out there to the public. And I really love that it's location on the east side. Black and brown comedy shows. Although that's not the mission probably of the owner originally, they are using their resources and spaces for these kind of activities, which I thought was pretty good. Let's see, I think maybe some points there for cultural leadership because of the fact that, again, they're not necessarily part of that background, and so that may, affect scoring. But I think it is important to take into consideration that they are reaching out to these groups and giving them a great place to have the artistic license. They had marketing plans of how they would spend their funds and give, fees to their artists. Let's see, what did I write down? I can't read my own handwriting. Oh, I think one question that I kind of was thinking about was there was information there about a new comedy club sign. And, I think that's great. I just wanted to, I was kind of curious of, I guess, eligibility on that because it's kind of a brick and mortar, I guess, project. It's not necessarily a performance space. That's an actual sign for a building location. So I just had, concerns about that or questions. Let's see. How will intersectionality, I think, it's clear that they're giving queer and POC groups the spaces and opportunity to do this. However, I just wondered how engaged they would be in this process and proposal. But, if funds are going to those groups, perhaps that's, perhaps that is enough and that answers the questions. I think the key thing here is that these are business relationships. And I was just wondering what the merit of business relationship versus true partnerships. So that was just something in my head I pondered. Unfortunately, the accessibility was venue only. So that I wish there was a little bit more there, maybe sign language or some other opportunity for these shows. I know it's hard since some of these are, again, comedy shows and, cabaret style shows, but also nothing else for other languages. So maybe there's a way to do that and include that in marketing. If we're really reaching out to focus on tourism in Austin, maybe they can reach, maybe they can consider that. It would be a recommendation that I have because I think that's a key part of what we want to consider on these grants. So I think that summarizes my notes. Let's see, on the budget, I just put, I appreciate the details on the budget. So yeah.
Thanks, Juan Ramon. And just I want to make a quick comment before we move on to the secondary panelist in regards to the sign expenses. That's not an applicant eligibility issue, but it could potentially be if they do end up receiving an award, it could be an expense that would not be an eligible expense. And it would be at that time that we would address any budget items that were being paid for with Elevate funds to ensure that they are in line with eligibility related to expenses. And then Larnie, you're up.
So I was back and forth with the application and I wanted to know more about, well, first of all, I was like, why am I missing all these shows? So that's what Austin has to offer. And I went into the rabbit hole of research. And so who's who and who's bringing who and all these collaboration. One, Ramon, you mentioned earlier before we started about like, hey, what about the physical more, brick and mortar? And that was the thing that I heard them like right away was one of the notes that I put was the sign. And I think they meant to say that, well, because we're hidden, that we need to make sure that everybody knows where we are. So I was trying to figure out what kind of partnerships that they have with their tenant, right? So I say tenant because the comedy folks are leasing from them. So is this and I've seen collaborations that way to where that they can keep the space open. And I think their history was they struggled before. They had to shut down and then reopen. And with reopening means also reassessing how they show up in Austin, how they show up in their lives. When I look at not just applications, stuff that's going on, I look at when the changes happen. Is it before 2020? Because there's a lot of like awakening that happened around that time, and some folks shifted to partnerships with people of color. We have been more relevant in terms of our practices, our, you know, what we offer in the community, in just anything, no matter what you do. And I do, you know, when something in the one of the rubric about tokenism, and I wanted to make sure that, you know, what does that really mean? Is it embodied here because it's sincere? And so I look into the intention and the energy of the what I'm reading and what the submission is about. And there's a clear message of wanting to make sure that it happens. So I love that part and the advocacy. And I do look into, will this happen if you don't get the grant? Like, will they be not get the calendar, you know, like the schedule, if they don't receive the grant, will it hurt so much? And I look at where the budget was going in terms of, oh, we'll be able to pay the artist double for that amount for this long. It's like, how much were the artists getting in the beginning? And for a lot of us here, we've been exposed to how much really we were valued, right? And for other folks, especially a performer of communities in the communities of color, especially LGBTQ. So I have those kinds of questions in terms of, is it priority right now to change your sign? Because I'm trying to remember what the money is around marketing, and if that should, you know, if it's about part of marketing, but again, the physical aspect of changing it. And I, you know, was trying to figure out what kind of team is it a team when you are, you know, again, the partnerships with the East Comedy Club, and there is that whole relationship of reciprocity, right? Because part of his what's his name? Part of what he said from the video is, hey, if you help him, he helps us out, or stay here, because rent is an issue. So
Arnie,
there you go. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to make sure that if there's any space for anyone else, I appreciate you. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I just want to see if there's anyone else that wanted to chime in.
Okay. That's it for me. I just wanted to trace back to see, you know, who the peep is and who they're bringing, and it's like a guarantee that they're gonna bring, because it's the peep is another one, and the one that they're bringing is another one. So anyway, I'm gonna thank you.
Was there anyone else? I think we have about a minute and a half or so. Hit our commentary on this application.
I'll say something. I also went back and forth on this one, but it did feel like a partnership, and it felt like it was very symbiotic, the East Austin Comedy Club and also the Le Peep and all of those things. But I did notice in the budget, it doesn't show where the money will go to their rent being reduced. So I would like to see that detail reflected in the actual budget, even though it was kind of spoken to prior. But I think, yeah, providing affordable space for artists is really important. That's all.
Got it. Just want to bring attention. Arnie offered some detail in the chat if anyone wants to observe that. But I think our time has passed. So for commentary on this application. Oh, muted, Henry. Oh,
There's 26 seconds. If anyone
26 seconds, folks. Haiku. Keywords.
Well, with that wraps up today's session. Thank you for being here. We'll have many more applications to review tomorrow. I mentioned this earlier, but I'll mention again. We'll open to the public at 10 a.m. The panelists will come into a little brief pre-session at 9:30 just to answer any follow-up questions or address any concerns you all may have. So that's what you've done. You've served as a panelist now, so you can check that off your box, off your bucket list. So we're looking forward to tomorrow. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts or anything, Alberto.
Just want to reemphasize my gratitude for each person's wisdom, skill, expertise, and compassion in working through this process. And I hope I've been a responsible and a caring, accountable facilitator to you. And I am excited about tomorrow as well.
Yes, tomorrow's going to be a great day. Looking forward to it. All right. Thank you all for joining us. Enjoy your evening, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.